What's up guys, welcome back to TwistBase. Today we're gonna build something very cool. It's a hidden menu you can reveal by swiping up or down. You can select the menu from the menu item and the state gets updated on top of the card. So you can see there's a little bit delay on the menu list item. There's quite some cool features to this, and I think let's just get straight into it. So when you've downloaded the starter project, this is what you'll get in the file. We got a blank screen showing the hello text for the moment. We got the main design of the app, but there's no interaction at the moment. If you check the home view.dart file, you'll see there's the main scaffold. We have a screen, and the screen is taking in a builder function, which is going to be our home widgets. The screen is actually responsible for just displaying the design of the screen. So this will be the top left and top right corner radius, the little handler at the top, and that's it. The screen is taking that builder function in here, and if you go back, you can see we're passing in the home widget, and this is just displaying whatever text or lists or whatever you want to display on the screen. I do this because it keeps things nice and tidy if your app is gonna scale. So that's one way of doing it. We also got all the globals in here, which we are going to use to fill out our list tables. I've got some of the models set up. You still need to fill those in. Some enum set up, and the constructor for the menu data. In the main.dart file, I've already set up the notifier provider view. I'm assuming you guys have some understanding of how provider works, because I'm not going into any detail for that. So that's that, and yeah, let's get started. First thing what we should be doing is we should test our main gesture detection, so to detect when a user is swiping up or down. And we could do that by simply wrapping our screen into a gesture detector. And this is going to take we're looking for three properties on the gesture detector, and that is the vertical drag start. I'm going to pass in the start parameter, and the vertical drag update, which is responsible for when the user is dragging. And lastly, the on vertical drag end, which in his case is responsible for when the user releases his finger or her finger, or when you remove the mouse. And we don't need to pass anything in here. So what we are going to do here is that we are going to create in our model function, we're going to create something like, let's see, vertical drag start, and this would be equal to the start global position.dy. And we do this because we want to use this variable we're setting here in this functionality here to check whether or not the user is swiping up or down. So once we're doing this, we can head over to our base model. You can see it is already extending from change notifier, and we can actually create. So let's go back to home view. Let's copy this variable in our home view. Let's create this by setting double vertical drag start equals nil. So whenever you're using provider and you want to use this kind of syntax, there's two ways we need to set this up. So we need to set up in our model a setter and a getter, or a getter and a setter. And we need to create, this is going to be a public one, and this should always point to the private one we're setting in our base model. So this should just be a get, and then in our setter function we should say vertical drag start. It works the same like constructing a sort of function, but this is just using whenever you set this outside of this class, this happens. So that means vertical drag start And then here we should do something like, this would be starting at 0. Then inside our scope here, we should set this to the value we are passing and then update all the listeners outside of the class. That's that. Looks a bit tedious and bits of lines just to set this up, but that's one way of doing it. So if you go here, we still need to specify what exactly our model is. And this is where provider comes in really handy, I find. So you can just use provider dot, and firstly let's import it. If you don't know, Alt Enter, and when you click on it, and this will automatically import the library of the context. And then right next to the of, you should always specify the type, and this is most likely going to be not chat model, but your model. So home model. And here, that's fine. Remember, we are using base model, but also in home model, this is extending from base model, so we can use home model as well. And I do this because when things get bigger in your app, you want to separate some stuff. And in base model, the ones you will be using through a different kind of screens, I would put in here. And something that is specific to the home model, or maybe you have some more. Let's say you're adding a tab bar indicator here, and you got a home, you got another view, you got another view. This would all implement from base model. So you're separating your model business logics throughout this kind of scenario. Cool. Let's see, going back to home view. So we got that set up. That's great. This is working. So now in our vertical drag update, the thing we should check for would be the vertical drag start. We just set it whenever this is starting. And you would say, okay, cool, global position.dy. Whenever this is bigger, that means the user is swiping up. And that means we also need to do something in our model again. So what we should do, and I think about it like this, we should set box scroll direction, which is an enum we specified in here. We can make use of to make things very readable. So we got two values, the up and down, and so let's make use of those. So I'm gonna call the set box scroll direction, and we are calling box scroll direction dot up. There you go. And otherwise, in the other case, we should do the opposite. Set box scroll direction down. So now let's copy this and let's create a function of this in our base model class. And you can do it simply by calling this void set box scroll direction with a value. And then let's create a variable, and this variable is going to be, actually it's not a, we should say it like this, it's of type box scroll direction. Let's see, box scroll direction, and I'm just going to copy this box scroll direction. Now we can import our enum. And let's make sure we can only pass in, I mean, you don't really need to do this, but this is like, again, if things are scaling, it's easier to track down bugs, or whenever you're passing a non-correct value. So you would say the box scroll direction would be the value, and then we would notify the listeners just like we did here. If you guys want to use this kind of, it's a bit shorter than using this, like the functionality. You can do this in here as well, but you can't, like outside of the class, you wouldn't be able to do this. So, I mean, it's a bit preference, to be honest. It doesn't really matter. It's going to do the same thing. So, that said, let's go back to our home view, right? Model.set box scroll direction. Wow, that's funny. Let's remove this, and then box scroll direction dots down. And now we can actually test this on the vertical direct end. So we can say model.box scroll direction. When this is equal to box scroll direction dot up. For now, let's print out swiped up, and otherwise swiped down. Let's hot restart. See, there's no errors at the moment. Yeah, sometimes you don't know, like it's always better to hot restarts once in a while. Very quick. Swipe down, swiped up, swiped up. So that's working as expected. And so yeah, let's move on. Let's actually trigger the animation. So the next thing would be, we want to be able to animate the screen that is actually reacting to the swipe up or down. So we could wrap our screen into a animated container. The animated container is going to take a duration, which you always need to specify. And this should be milliseconds, and let's say half a second, 500 milliseconds. Then the main functionality we're using is the transform property. This is going to be matrix4.identity. You can do ..translates, and here the translate function, you can pass in X or Y values. But for us, it's only important if we are animating the Y value. So again, we can make use of our model, and we can create a variable which we're going to use, translate Y. Notice here that I'm using 2 dots. It comes in really handy when, let's say you want to scale this as well. You can just add 2 dots again and then add scale. And this all lives on the same transform property, which is quite handy actually. So yeah, but in our case, we're just using the translate Y because we're not scaling anything. We're just moving up and down, or down and up. Going back to let's go to our home model. And let's create our translate Y value. And we're gonna set this to null, to be null. So when you think about the menu, like how should we be doing this? How should we be triggering the up and down? And what you don't really want to do is you don't really want to have separate methods for, let's say, move menu down, move menu up, because it's really easy to lose track of what you're doing. So I think that a solution would be you would just create a method called toggle, and the toggle will always do up or down based on what you're expecting it to do. So you should always do as much as business logic as you can in your home model. So outside of this, when you're calling it in your home view, you should only be worrying about like, okay, model.toggle whenever this is correct. And the model should figure out for you if it's correct or it's not correct, or what it should do is the user swiping up or down. So continuing with this, the toggle method, it should take a optional parameter of the height of the screen to animate it like all the way down. And then we need a sort of boolean to keep track of whenever it is toggled. So I'm gonna set this to false, just like that. And then whenever this function is called, we need to do the opposite, or we need to make sure toggled is not toggled. So this is the same as saying like is true, or when it's true, it would be false again. So whenever this is, whenever this is toggled, we should be translating or updating our translate Y value. And translate Y value to the height, which is gonna move it all the way down, like until here. And we wanna go a bit up again, so we can subtract it with like 180 or something. Then otherwise, You want to reset it again, going back all the way up. That's it. Then at the end, we want to notify the listeners to make sure the values actually get updated. And yeah, that's it for now. Let's test it out really quick. Model to translate to Y, and then when we swipe up, we should call our model.toggle. I mean, see how easy that is? You just need to call toggle, that's it. And swipe model.down. And here we actually need to specify the height of the screen. And the height is something we still need to specify right at the top. We can do that right underneath or where we specified our model variable. So again, we can create a height. And this comes in really handy. It's the media query of context size.height. And this will take always the height of your current screen. Doesn't matter if you're using an iPhone 8 or whatever phone you're using, it's getting the right height for the screen. And this is also very handy why optional parameters sometimes come in handy. Like we don't need to specify it here because we don't need it. But in here we do, so that solves that problem. So let's hot restart and see what the app is doing. Cool. So that's working as expected. The only thing you might notice is like, let's say I swipe up once, or sorry, I swipe down once. When I swipe down again, it's going to trigger the menu again, and that's actually not what we want. But to fix this, it's actually quite an easy fix. We just need to extend our if statements, and we would do that by using the is toggled. And whenever the menu is toggled, we should only swipe up. And now the second thing we need to do is we need to extend our else statement to an else if statement. Change the box scroll direction to down in here, and then do the opposite of what we're doing above. Let's test this really quick. So we're swiping down again, doesn't work. The only state we can go is up. When we go up, we can only go up once, and now our only state is going down. So that solves that. That's why I actually made this as toggles variable. It's just easier to keep track of what you're doing. Moving on to let's display the first menu list of the item, and we can, let's see, if you think about it, the cool thing to do would be we can wrap this whole thing in a stack, let's say, right? Column, and then replace it with stack. And then let's for now just create one list item in a container. So that would be a container. Let's specify a height of, let's say, 80, and let's give it a decoration of type box decoration. I really like this feature. Actually, I'll use this feature all the time. I mean, sometimes if you're using it quite a lot, it's better to refactor it, put that box decoration somewhere in a global widget, and then you can reuse it all the time. But for now, I'm not gonna go into that. So we can specify a color here. Let's take one of our globals. What do we got? Probably, let's say light black. Gonna add opacity to it, like 2. And then we want the border radius to be border radius circle for all of them to be like 20. Let's put a comma, hit save. There you go. This is one of our boxes. Let's get some padding to it, just on this, and I'm gonna use only. We want to have left, because imagine there's gonna be more on the screen as well. So left, I want this to be 20. Right, I want this to be the same. and then top 10 and bottom, say bottom also 10. If you would do border radius all, and it's gonna be 20, like it's gonna be way too much spacing vertically, I find personally. So we would do something like this. That's gonna give our first item, then our child of the container. Actually, let's create a row, because we are gonna have a, remember, we're gonna have an icon here and we're gonna have a text widget here. So let's create a row. Row has steps children. So first I'm gonna take an icon. Icons dot. I mean, I'm not gonna use the data right now, just to display things, and you guys can see what's actually going on. So we got icons home, and then we got a text widget that is gonna say home, for example. Home. Let's add a sized box, because you could use the main axis alignment or the cross axis alignment property to space things across the whole width, but we actually are focusing on this part. So if you don't want to do the space even or space between properties, you could use a sized box to make it your own, basically. So let's say, okay, I want 20 width in the beginning. I'm gonna copy this, and between the icon and the home I want 10 or something like that. Can hit that. That's looking okay. Maybe should be 20 here as well. Something like that, right? So that brings the idea of what we are actually building. But now we're only displaying one item. So what would be the best thing to do if you think about adding a list, like a whole list to it, and actually not hard coding these values, but making use of our global list? So that's going to be the next thing we will be doing. So firstly, let's take all from the padding, right? Let's take it in here and just leave that as is. If I hit hot refresh, it's gone. Now let's go to our menu list widget. This is going to be a stateless widget. So we can say menu list widget, just like that. Import the material class. And now let's just paste in this, remove the comma, and put a semicolon at the end. Okay. So in the menu list, we are just displaying the design of one list item. And in our home view, going back to our home view, let's say, okay, we're just gonna see the menu list widgets. That's all fine. So in our home view, you need to think about what are we actually doing. And similar to AnimatedContainer, Flutter also provides you with a animated list, which is similar to like a list view builder. The only thing is, like, you can make animation of the list quite easy without, again, creating your own animation controllers and doing everything from scratch. So let's start by adding the animated list. And if you're used to lists, like you're probably used to like the initial item counts, which will be the list we specified in our global, the menu items dot length. And then let's see what else there is. There's also a builder, the item builder, which is gonna be let me double check. So you can always check what's going on by, so it takes in the context, the index, and the animation. Doesn't matter what you name these, it's just for your own reference. Cool. And what else is there to specify? Initial item count. You don't need that. Okay. So this basically should return our menu list widgets. Menu list widgets. Let's put a comma in here. See? And that was really easy. For the animated list, there's only one requirement left, and you need to specify a key. And that's the reason, because we are animating items in the list, and this requires a global key, which I specified in our class here. And I'll show you in a bit why this is actually really necessary to do stuff, because also the initial item counts, we are at the moment setting this to the menu items at length, but this should also not be the case, because we need to create a variable that holds our list styles, and because we are adding them and removing them. And the way AnimatedList works is that when you remove items from the stack or you add them to the stack, they will in their place be animated. So you can't actually make use of the global menu items. You need to create, in your model class, you need to create a separate list style array that is holding the menu data, right? So let's do that. So let's go back to our home model and let's create our list. And this is going to be of type menu data. Remember, we specified this in our model class. And so we would have list styles, and we would set it to an empty array, right? Then, so think about it like this is our menu data, just taking in the from map, which we are going to call in a bit, in the constructor, and it's making the properties on that class available for you, so you don't have to call this all the time. So let's go back to our home model, and let's actually create a function, and we would say get list styles. And what is this gonna do? It's gonna set our list styles to be equal to global dot menu items. And we want to map, you think about the map function, right? We want to map the items the item on that list, and we want to be calling menu data.fromMap. We want to pass in that item right here, and then you want to make this a list because we specified the list menu data. Otherwise it's gonna be a map, and we don't really want a map in this case because we are looping over the list for the animated list. So what this function does is it's taking our menu items and it's gonna map them over, or so every menu item is gonna become a menu data, really, like if you think about it like that. And that's where the map function comes in really handy, and you're gonna see why in a bit. So if you think about when do we need to get the list styles, and I should make this a private variable because we don't want to call this outside of the function. We want to call this as soon as this function is called. And the way things work here is that our global key, when you think about it, we should have, whenever we toggle the method, we should have a function that says upload items, and another function that says delete items. Because remember I said the animated list works when you insert or delete items on the stack using your global key. So delete items. So let's copy these classes, and underneath the get list styles, let's say, you don't need to specify void really. Flutter is smart enough to know it's just for readability reasons I do this. So the first thing we should do is we should upload our items, right? And the way this works is by a simple for loop is null Oh, to specify the index. This is smaller than, and we should use our global dot menu items dot lengths. And then we increment our index. Now in here, we should think about the global key. So global dot global key, right? And so let's see what properties we got. We got current state and we got current widget. But that's not what we want. We want the current state. And then on the current state, we can add insert item. And this is gonna take in our index, just like that. Just one more thing we need to add is the duration. You can specify here of type duration, and then let's say our milliseconds, 500. Cool. So to make this actually work, or we can't actually in our animated list, we should wrap this menu list widget in a slide transition. And this is gonna be actually using this animation, otherwise nothing will happen, nothing will be animated. So we can use slide transition. And it's gonna be, sometimes if you see this yellow, it means there's a requirement missing and the position is missing. So position, this would be, we can use the animation parameter the Flutter provides us in the item builder. So you would say animation.drive, and then we have to create a tween property in our model, which we're gonna do in a bit. And that's just, I'm just gonna hot rebuild. Nothing's gonna happen because we still need to specify our tween. So let's go to our model class and specify our tween property. So we can do that somewhere, let's say here. The tween is gonna be of type animatable. Offsets. Tween. Something like this. Let's add the material. And what you should be doing, so it always has a beginning. So far, begin is offsets, which is going to be 0 and then 1, and it has an ending, and offset dot 0 because we don't need that, and then the main tween is gonna be expecting, if you're using tween, then open it, and it's expecting a beginning, which we just specified, and an end, which we specified as well. Then if you want to use curves, you can chain this up. Let's see what we need here. Chain, and then let's see, curve tween, something like this, and then curve, we can use curve. Let's see, curves dot is in out quart, something like this. I mean, you can use a global curve if you would like. This is just gonna chain or tween with a specific curves, and if you see the curves has a lot of like things you can use, but for now I will just use the in out quart. So that's that, and because we are expecting this to return something, we should actually return our tween. Then I'm gonna create basically our getter function. So we could say tween should return our tween function. There we go. something like this. Cool. So if you check the home view, this is going to drive our model.tween. So that's what we want in here. Then the last thing we still need to do is when we need to delete the items from the stack again when the user is dismissing the menu. So let's do this as well. So let's delete items. Let's copy our for loop. And in this case, we don't want to start at null. We should start at the bottom of the list. -1, because remember the index starts at null and the length is always I would be, as long as I or our index is bigger than null, and then we would subtract our index. So now let's create a variable that gets hold of our deleted item, and I'm going to call this deleted item. This would be let's see, oh yeah, the list styles dot remove ads, and then our index, something like this. So now again we should call our global key and then the current state, the global key dot current state, and then we should remove item, not delete item, using that index, and then we expecting a builder function, which in this case is gonna take a context and the animation, and it's gonna remove this, not animation but animation. Cool. So that's that. What is it still expecting in here? Probably remove item in here, and then a duration again, milliseconds, 500. Yeah. So now let's copy the stuff we done in the home view. Let's take this slide transition and let's paste it in here. Sorry, the home model, and let's return that in here. Let's import that menu list widget, and we don't need this because we are in the model itself. So to make actually use of this item, we should pass it, and we should create a property under class that takes in an item. In this case it would be deleted item. And if you go to the menu list widget, we should create a final property of menu data, and this is going to be the item, and then open the constructor and then set up the constructor so you can use it outside of the class, or you can pass in the value. Going to our home view, we can specify our item, and our items would be the model.listStyles. No, that's not correct. Sorry, the model. Oh yeah. So model.listStyles, and then just add in the index of our item builder. So let's quickly hot restart just to see where we're at, because we might run into some errors, and then okay, cool. So you can see what's actually happening. Our screen is animating up and down. Now, one thing that is still left is like, you need to think about how are we actually creating that cool delay when you swipe down. And one way of doing this would be, if you go back to the home model and think about when you're uploading it, you wanted to add a delay to it. So one way of doing this would be to create a future dot delayed, and again this expects a duration, let's see, duration, duration milliseconds, 500, then an anonymous closure function, just like this. But we don't want to delay 500 per list item. Let's say 75 milliseconds, something like this, because it needs to be very subtle. And then just take this insert item function and wrap it in here. Now let's rebuild. Let's increase this to 175. Oh, actually, if you want this to make it work, you need to make sure you're actually waiting for the future. And one way of doing this, you need to make your function asynchronous. And you should call, so as soon as you call async on a function, you have access to the await key functionality. So this is going to wait for every feature to complete, which in this case is going to result in a delay. Let's just change that curve to simply ease in out, and let's just rebuild this. So this gives a much smoother animation, like just play around with the curves. Can have a big difference in results most of the time. So now we're still using all the same properties, so now we can go to our AnimatedList widget and we can actually make use of that item, which is the cool thing about this. So now instead of using this, you can say, okay, item.icon, and in your title item.name. And this is where, or what I was saying, like the model is really handy to come in, because you can, it's living on the item itself, and it's really easy because in our home view we are passing every list style item that's currently in list. Notice when we remove it, the list style is fully emptied, and in this case it's added back to the list. So next up, we should be able to get an update for when we are clicking on it, update the background color and update the state on the hello. So let's dive into that as well. And if you think about it, let's go to our AnimatedList widget. Below our first padding, we can wrap the container into a Inkwell, which is going to be responsible for the tapping. You could use a GestureDetector as well, but this is not going to allow you to see the material tap. So when you tap it, we can see what you've tapped, and also you can see the Inkwell. One thing that is not the corners, you can see it's a rectangle and the edges, but we want it to be following the same border radius as here, and we can do that simply by copying the border radius property, and we can paste it on the Inkwell as well. Let's hot reload, and this should be working as expected. So that's that. Next, let's actually so when we tap this, we want to be able to change the the color of it, right? So let's do that as well. So one way of doing that, you need a lot of like in the ternary operator. And let's see, for example, when we go to the onTap functionality, we should have a property that says model.active would be our item we just tapped. And okay, and it's actually really easy to set up. We can go to our home model, and then let's go underneath. It doesn't really matter where you put it, but let's create a active property. So let's say get active is going to return our private active variable, and then set active. Remember, same kind of functionality as a function, just a setter method, and this is the item we pass in, and our active is gonna be our value. Cool. Then we should notify the listeners. And we should only set the private variable to be, let's see what kind of item it should be. So if I think about it, you should do menu data.from map, and then we should pass in the global.menuItems.first. Because remember, the from map is expecting a map, and this is actually a map, so we're just taking the first item in the list, which is going to be lights. So we want this to be on, like by default, on first. And what this is going to be, so menu data active, something like this. And so when you run this, we can test it. Undefined name model. Let's make use of the provider package just to create our model. Provider dot. Let's import it of home model and then pass in our context. Cool. This should be fine. One way of checking this would be, okay, let's just change the background color, for example. At no moments. So what I was saying, like we should wrap up a condition, and let's call it a bool, right? Is selected, and this equals to model.active.name or let's see, because we have menu data, we should just specify this. Sorry, menu data active, new list widgets. Why is this not working? Right. So you just make sure you put menu data in front of the getter method, not in between. The get should always follow up by this. So now moving on to menu lists, we have access to the name, and what the condition should be is that the is selected should be whenever your item.name would be item.name. So we're checking for the model active, the active one, and the one that's actually in the object itself. This is our Boolean expression. You could use it by just using this, but then it's gonna get more, you're gonna have more lines of code. So we can copy this, then check for in our, for example, the background color. So whenever this should be selected, we actually want it to be full white, global.white. Otherwise, it should be light black. And these are ternary operated, but it's the same as it's actually syntactic sugar for a if statement. You can use it in one line, and it's really, really handy. I use it all the time. So let's hot restart this just to see if our logic is working. Cool. This is this, and there we go. I'm not gonna make it fully like the same. I mean, feel free, guys, to play around with the colors whenever you select. I challenge you to use this selected tool and apply it to like the color of the icon or whatever you want. But the only thing we're still gonna be doing is actually toggle the menu when you click it and update the state here. And I'm sure you guys can pick it up from there. So we got the basic features covered. So there's only one thing left. So when we toggle the menu, let's think about the model.toggle. And in this case, we don't need to specify the height because the menu is going to go all the way up, which should be fine. And then we should add a future delayed property because we don't want it to, we want to get the feeling that you're tapping it and then the reaction. If you would do it instantly, it's going to go way too fast. So again, we can do this with a future delayed, and then the milliseconds, let's say 200. I mean, can be whatever. Open the anonymous function. Cool, fine. And then toggle the menu, right? So let's hot restart just to see what's happening. So I'm doing this. Cool. Cool. So that's that. The final thing we need to do, guys, and then we're done, is to update our state in here, and that's going to be actually really easy because the way we've set a provider. Going to our home widget, which is currently displaying the, and let's not type it in this time. Let's just take our model in here and the home widgets. Let's paste it in here. Let's import our provider package of home model. Let's import our home model. There we go. And what this should be, now we can do model.active.name. Let's hot restart. Sweet, we got lights. Selecting aircon, we got aircon, and going on. I mean, guys, there's really no limit of what you can do. We can wrap this quickly in a row. Let's add our icon. Let's add our icon in here, and let's add model.active.icon. Add a comma. Do hot reloads just to see how fast things are. Let's we're in a row. Let's do the main axis alignment dot center, and let's add a little bit of spacing in between. 20.0. Add a comma. Hit restart. And there you go. I mean, you can do whatever you want with it. So that's that. Everything is working nice. I mean, I would hope you guys to experiment it with a bit, make it your own, use it on your own project, and the main thing is that you're actually, I mean, enjoying the process, right? Just learn some cool stuff on the way. Guys, I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you like my video, just like it or hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys later.